Hi, everybody. Welcome back to episode 2 of The Way of the Dog. Today we're going to be talking about different types of training. So it's mainly going to be force training versus force-free training, meaning aversive versus positive reinforcement. So I am a positive reinforcement trainer. I don't use any kind of aversive tools or methods, and we'll go into that, what that means. So for those who don't actually know what the difference is. So I wasn't initially going to actually talk about this, but what ended up happening was I was at a client's house doing a consultation with them. And she's having trouble walking her dog. Dog's a year old and pulls a lot. So we started doing some work, started teaching some basics of heel. And she noticed that I was very gentle with her dog. And her actual comment to me was, "You're very gentle with him." And I was really taken back by this. I was really, I didn't understand why, obviously I'm going to be gentle with your dog. Why wouldn't I be gentle? And I go, yeah, that's how you get a response. You be gentle with the dog. You know, you're not going to be mean to it. And she goes, no. That's my other trainer said that, for instance, if your dog bites, grab by the neck and don't let go until it stops. And when she told me that, I registered very quickly what she meant. I'm generally what breeders or other people will say, or aversive trainers or balance trainers will say, if your dog is hard or heavy with the mouth, you grab the scruff of the neck and you pinch it and you twist it to cause them pain to get them to stop doing what they're doing. So that is actually an aversive method of training and getting that dog to break their habit of doing whatever it is that they're doing. We don't generally want to do that way. Yes, we want to get rid of the behavior, but we don't want to do it in that manner. So when she told that to me, I just flabbergasted. I'm like, why would you want to hurt your dog to teach it not to do something? It doesn't work that way. If you don't want your dog to do something, teach it to do something else instead. Redirect the behavior that you want it to do. So we sat there talking about it for a little bit, and really at the end of the day, we just came to the conclusion, it's like, this is how you're supposed to be training your dog in these manners. And she completely agreed with me. So what ended up happening was we just continued on a little bit before our session ended. But really, it bothered me a lot that this is still happening. I mean, I understand there's the old school method of training and that people really get involved in it in this manner. But come on, you don't need to cause pain to a dog to get them to do what you need them to do. We're being selfish as it is by taking these dogs and putting behaviors that they already do on command so that we can control them. So if you're going to start hurting them as well, then it's ridiculous at that point. You know, it's like, imagine you get a job and you start training with that job, and then all of a sudden the manager starts smacking you or punching you every time you mess something up. You're not going to want to stay there. That's not pleasant. You're not going to want to do the job. You're going to be scared of your manager. You're going to be scared to screw up. You're going to shut down and you're going to leave. Or you might just beat the hell out of the manager yourself. And that's exactly what dogs will do. They will react eventually. It might not happen right away, but eventually they will break down, they will snap, and they will attack you. Or you might have a fear-driven dog and it's just not going to be conducive to a household. It won't be conducive to a household of children. It won't be able to be out in public. You won't be able to take it on walks. And you're going to have a giant problem to deal with. So getting into this, just so you understand what aversive training is. So aversive training is when you cause a dog discomfort through force or pressure, or you add things or take things away in order to get a dog to do something. So for instance, the old school mentality of getting a dog to sit would be you yank up on that leash, choke the dog, and shove their butt down and yell at them to sit. So you're choking them, which you're hurting them, you're stressing them out, and then you're using your hand to shove the butt down. So the dog's not actually learning anything. What they're learning is that you're going to hurt them and they're going to be scared and that you're going to choke them and you're going to force them to do things. With positive reinforcement, we are completely hands-off. We don't use our hands at all on the dogs. They do everything themselves. The minute you start touching the dog, that touch becomes part of that training. So when you start yanking up on the leash and shoving the butt down, that's the only way they know how to sit. So you're going to continue to do that because that's how they know how to do things. So that's aversive training. So the minute you apply pressure or any kind of discomfort, and then the behavior happens, then you release that discomfort, pressure, or pain, or whatever it might be. And that becomes a reward in itself. So they start doing things just so they stop getting hurt. And that is a fear reaction. That's not a positive reaction that you want out of a dog. Whereas positive-based training, positive reinforcement training that I do, it is reward-based, meaning treats, verbal praise, petting, so physical touch, walks, playtime, toys, anything of a positive nature. And what this does is it actually helps to reinforce that behavior. So if you're trying to teach your dog to sit, you give them a hand signal to sit, and when they do it, you give them a treat. And what that does is, oh, I did something good, I get a reward for it. And yes, I know there's complaints that people will sit there and say, oh, but they only do things for treats. Oh, you'll never get your dog back off leash. Oh, forget it. The minute they're distracted, you're never going to get them back. Well, that's a load of crap. I have an Australian Shepherd. I've had her off leash many times. I get her back every time. She doesn't even run out of my sight. She comes back and forth to me when I let her off leash. And that's just what it is. It's because of the positive reinforcement that she understands that what she's doing is fine. She's not going to be punished for it, and there's a reward for it. And the reward is actually her being off leash and being able to run around. And she knows that when she comes back to me, she's going to get pet or some other kind of reward as well. Understanding how dogs are meant to be, how to actually interact with them, and how their cognitive abilities work, their psychology behind them, actually gives you a better idea and understanding of how dogs actually are and how they should be treated. So there's a few studies that I want to talk through. So there's Dr. Stanley Coren, who is out in Vancouver. He is a psychologist at UBC. He is a human psychologist, but he also does animal behavior, and he's very well known in the animal community for this stuff. So he actually wrote a paper recently in 2023 called "Does It Matter If Dog Training is Positive or Aversive?" He goes into great detail about the study that was done in Portugal with different training classes and different training methods, force-free training, force training, aversive tools, and force-free training, positive reinforcement, and there was even balanced trainers. Balanced trainers use both methods depending on the situation, what they feel will work best. So the reason they did this study in Portugal was to see how dogs reacted in the short term and long term with regards to the respected training methods that were used, as well to see how that specific training method affected the dogs in short term versus long term. So what they're doing is they're taking groups of dogs in these classes in Portugal, and they're seeing how over time, in the short term and in the long term, their training methods will affect them. So will the positive reinforcement dogs continue to be happy-go-lucky dogs? Will the aversive trained dogs continue to be fear-cowering dogs? And how their thought psychology will work. So while recording the classes, they measured the stress levels of the dogs associated with the training style being used. They would look for signs of stress by watching for cringing, yelping, lip licking, panting, and so on. They also took saliva samples to monitor stress levels during training. They took saliva on the days when the dogs were relaxing at home to get a baseline and from each dog after each training session. So what they're doing here is actually getting a baseline of the dogs. They're taking vitals of the dogs before and after to see how things are changing within the dog and what kind of stress signals their bodies are giving. Not just visually, because there are a bunch of visual cues here, but internally as well. So they were looking at the cortisol levels in the blood. Cortisol, for those who don't know, is the hormone, the stress hormone. So when you are super stressed out, your body releases a lot of cortisol. So dogs in aversive training programs showed stress-related behaviors, panting, yawning, lip licking. The dogs that deal with leash jerks and yelling and other methods of force had a significantly increased level of cortisol compared to those that were trained using positive reinforcement. So the more that you are aggressive with the dog, the more stressed out they become. We have to remember that. So if you're going to be abusive, understand that you're not going to get a proper reaction. or you're going to get a shut down dog, or less of a reaction, or a more cautious behavior. So it's not exactly what you want, whereas positive reinforcement will give you that opposite effect. It creates a bubbly, happy-go-lucky dog that wants to work, that is willing to work. So essentially, when a dog is forced to do something, they will do it, but it won't be by choice. It will be by force, that they will be punished if they don't. So looking at long-term effects of how a dog is trained is very important. This sets how your dog will behave from that point forward, whether your dog is happy-go-lucky, willing dog, or a fearful, stressed out, pessimistic, not willing, but does it out of fear dog, and as I just mentioned. So according to Dr. Coren's paper, a month after the initial training with the dogs, another test was done. So in this test, they brought back 79 of 96 dogs that they were using in the initial month for the initial training. They trained these 79 dogs with a new task. So this task was to figure out if a bowl in a room had treats in it or not. And what they're trying to do with this is see how the dog approaches the bowl. If they're going to approach it quickly, if they're going to be more cautious about it, if they're more skeptical or pessimistic about it, or more optimistic about the situation. And what they did was it would be a sausage that they'd have in a bowl, and they'd rub all the bowls with the sausage so they'd all have the scent on it. So they wouldn't be able to tell if it was actually in there or not. So they would monitor these dogs, watch them move in the room towards the bowls. They noted that the dogs who were trained using positive reinforcement were quicker to approach the bowl and expected a treat. While the dogs trained with aversive training approached a bowl at a slower pace, meaning they were pessimistic and didn't actually think or weren't sure if there actually was a treat in the bowl. So they weren't expecting anything good to be coming as a consequence of their behaviors and their choices, in other words. So they were kind of scared to do anything and figure out what really was happening with the bowls and whether or not there was a treat in it. So they concluded from this study that the psychological welfare of the dogs who were aversive trained was at risk. So this is just one study. There are a lot more. Dr. Stanley Coren wrote another paper for Psychology Today. So both of these are on Psychology Today. I will put the links up in the show notes so you guys can actually read the papers that he wrote. I'm just pulling pieces out of it. So this paper, the second paper I'm going to talk about, is called The Effect of Training Methods on the Efficiency of Learning. So you can figure out what that means very easily. So how you train something, or how you train one of the dogs, and how quickly and efficiently they learn. So as you can tell, the basis of the paper was that at a Psychologists Association meeting, a colleague of Dr. Coren's approached Dr. Coren and told him that he didn't agree with a paper that Dr. Coren wrote, stating that punishment and physical force training increased stress in dogs. So this other doctor did a lot of studies and military work with dogs and handlers. So his thought and his idea was that when the dog is training, yes, they're under a lot of stress and tension, but once the training is done, that stress dissipates, but you're left with the good behavior. Dr. Coren pointed into a study of training military service dogs headed by a Dr. Anouk Haverbeck of the University of Namur in Belgium. This study was published in the Journal of Applied Animal Behavior Science. So the study that he is referring to involved 33 military dogs and handler teams from the Belgian army. They made sure that the dogs were a representation of the military canine population, sex and breed, so it was proportionate. They also used Belgian Shepherds and German Shepherds for this experiment. The handlers worked with their dogs using whichever rewards or punishments they thought worked best in training. So positive training rewarded the dogs by stroking or petting, verbal praise, toys, and food, where the negative training punished the dog for either, not following through correctly or poorly. So the punishments were speaking harshly or yelling, tugging up sharply on the leash using choke or prong collars, hanging the dog by the collar, hitting the dog with the hand or the leash, or using an electric shock collar. The handlers used a mixture of these methods. Some trainers used punishment a lot more, while others were predominantly positive rewards. So they tested the handlers twice in an open field that was set up for assessing how well the dogs performed. There were 8 obedience exercises. So they did a walk at heel, a sit, down, stand positions at distance, some recall to heel, down out of view of the handler, jump, and they followed up by 5 protection work exercises. So the tests were all videotaped to allow the dogs and the handlers' performance to be measured. They would tally up the amount of correct performances and use the Army's numerical scoring method as they would. Aside from just how they performed, what they were actually able to see was the dog's behavior. So whenever the handler told them to do something or get them to do something, they were actually able to visually see what's going on the dog's face and on their body. So if a dog didn't look at the handler or in the direction of their task, they were considered distracted. So as well, they looked at the stress of the dog, mainly if the dog was carrying their body in a low, cowering, or cringe posture. So at the end, they split the dog and handler teams into 2 groups. So they had the high performance and the low performance. The researchers found that the dogs who received the most punishment were more likely to be in the low performance group. This means they did not learn as well. They also found that dogs that were disciplined more were much more distracted, paying less attention to their handler and the tasks at hand. They found this to be related to the fact that the handler and the task had negative associations attached to them. Since the handler and task were connected to negative feelings, the dog would not look at the handler as a way to avoid them and the stress that the handler causes them. So if you're ever working with your dog, or if you're the dog owner and you're trying to get your dog to do something, your dog licks its lips and turns its head away and just tries to avoid you at all costs, it's because they're stressed out. So when you're in a situation like a military situation where the dogs are always going to be in a high stress situation running through war zones, you have to make sure that you know what you're doing with your dog and making sure that you're not punishing them every 5 seconds when they're already stressed out, because their stress levels are going to climb. And when they do that, you're not going to get a dog that is going to be able to perform. So I can keep going on with these studies, but I think you get the picture. Training with force or any kind of negative approach hinders the dog's ability to learn. Imagine you're in a class and every time you get an answer wrong, you get smacked with a ruler. So if you're old enough to remember the days of corporal punishment in school, this was a way of teaching people. And it's not effective. I mean, you scare the students. Yeah, you scare them straight into studying more, not getting answers wrong. But at the end of the day, you're not teaching them properly. You're punishing them because they're not understanding something. So there's a miss of communication going on, especially with the dogs and the handlers. There's a miscommunication piece happening. And this is, as a trainer, this is part of my teaching. So when I go into a house and I see the relationship between the dog and the owner, I can often tell who the dog respects, who the dog does not respect. And I can often tell that when the dog is more playful with one person, more obedient with the person, I can tell whose roles are what in that house and how the dog views them. So it really comes down to a lot of communication and just understanding, again, as I mentioned, the psychology of the dog and how they think and what makes them tick. So we have to understand that dogs don't just get stressed out from being mistreated. Anything can stress out a dog. During training sessions, it gets to the point at times where the dog doesn't want to bother with their owner. They just come straight to me. And I have to end up ignoring them and turning my back at times or even walking out of the room so that the owner can do what they have to do and be able to work with the dog. I have an energy when I walk in, just through experience, that the dog understands who I am and what I'm there for. And it's generally just because I have treats with me as well, so they like me more. The owners have treats as well, but I'm somebody new that's giving them a treat. So there's a lot of things that go into play when training dogs, and we have to really take the full spectrum into account. So another thing, your dog relies on you to feed them, walk them, play with them, and love them. They also rely on you to protect them and keep them safe and put them at ease. If they're in uncomfortable situations, if there's fireworks, if there's people banging on the door at Halloween, for instance, So these are situations that are highly stressful for dogs, where you have loud noises, banging. Dogs are very scared of them. They hide under tables, they'll hide under beds. A lot of the time they can even run away. You constantly have a doorbell ringing, the dogs will go crazy and they'll be barking a lot, they'll be stressed out a lot from it, and it's very bothersome. So they have to come to us. They have to be able to rely on us to help them through these situations. They didn't ask us to buy them or adopt them or take them home. We did it on our own accord. We have to be nice to them. We have to treat them properly. And we have to give them that understanding that no matter what, we are there for them and we are going to help them. So going back to what I was saying, though, with understanding how dogs interact with people in the homes, a lot of the time women are very nurturing to the dog, they're very loving to the dog, but at the same time they tend to have higher pitched voices. So to a dog, they might sound more like a squeak toy or a plaything, whereas the man in the house or a male in the house might have a deeper voice. And when they have that deeper voice, it comes off as more commanding. And they listen to that voice more. It's like, okay, I'm being told to do something, I'm going to do it. And it doesn't have to be done in a nasty, mean way where you're yelling at the dog. It's just saying, sit. So it's the command of the voice. It's how you carry your body, how you enunciate your words. Are you going, sit, sit, come on, sit for me, please? Or if you're saying, sit. When you have the confidence with what you're telling your dog to do, your dog will have the confidence in you. If your dog senses that you don't have that confidence, to them, it means that you don't have the ability to protect them, and they're not going to trust you in that manner. Have the confidence with your dog. You don't have to take their nonsense, but be nice about it. Lay down the law, but in a nice way. Tell them who's boss. Follow through. You ask them to do something. If they turn to walk away, bring them back. Get them to do what you have asked them to do. Obviously, in a nice way, though. So again, this is why we use treats and positive reinforcement, because the treat itself helps reinforce the behaviors that we want. What can happen? Yes, dogs can be bribed into doing things just for treats. We can avoid that. When a dog starts getting a command and they can do it after, I don't know, say 10 times in a row, start limiting the amount of treats you give them for that command. So for sit, after a week of training, I tell a person to stop rewarding them for sit. Sit is a second nature command. Don't worry about rewarding it anymore. Move on to the next one that you're having problems with. What you can do with that, you can start minimizing the amount of treats you're giving or get them to do more for less. So the more work you get them to do, you give them a treat. So you get them to do 10 different commands or 10 different movements or whatever it might be, and then you give them a reward. And this helps them break that habit of doing things just for treats. So there will always be naysayers. Everyone has their own approach when it comes to training their dogs, but the science is in the pudding. Positive reinforcement is science-based. It's backed by science. There are tons and tons of research papers done on the effects of positive reinforcement. And as well with kids. Like positive reinforcement in schools with parenting, it works across the board. But it has to be done properly. So according to the reports or the research that we just went through quickly, I know I didn't go into great detail about everything happening with it, but generally speaking, what they're pulling out of things is that how you train a dog is going to dictate how that dog behaves in the future, how their cognitive abilities will be, how they will perform, how they will be around people, how they're going to look at you, how they're going to associate you with certain activities. And not just in the short term of the training, but in the long term. You keep yelling at a dog. Certain dogs are very sensitive. Shepherds are very, very sensitive dogs. You can't be harsh to them. They will shut down on you. So if you sit there yelling at them, they will cower away. If you sit there and start smacking a dog, chances are they're not going to like it and they're going to attack you. Be smart about how you're training your dogs. Don't throw beanbags at your dogs to get them to stop doing something. Figure out what is causing the problem and then go on from there. So, Robert Miner, author of Absolute Positive Gun Dog Training, said, "If you can determine the cause of a dog's problem, you can use positive reinforcement to fix it. There is not a single situation or a single problem my dog may have that I cannot resolve with positive reinforcement." And that goes with most dogs. There's generally no reason to use aversive tools, prong collars, chokes, martingale style collars. They don't do anything. They cause discomfort and pain. You're not teaching your dog anything. You're not teaching them how to walk properly. You're stopping them from pulling, yes, because you're choking them and you're putting prongs into their neck. And those prongs, if that collar is not used properly, can cause serious damage to your dog's neck. The chokers and martingales do the same thing. They just cut off the airway, and it gets your dog to slow down. So the minute they slow down, the collar loosens up. Oh, look at that. That's the reward. So yeah, they might stop pulling for a little bit, but they're going to not understand the connection because there's nothing being taught there. It's just something tight around their neck. So they'll back up a little bit and then they'll pull again. They'll back up and pull again. And they'll keep doing this. And you're not actually fixing the situation. So, as I was saying, there's going to be people who are going to call me out on this or whatever it might be. There are people who sit there and say positive reinforcement is garbage. I've never seen it work better. I've never had any other experience than it working well. So, keep doing what you're doing with your positive reinforcement. If you're balanced, or if your dog has been balance trained, or you trained your dog using aversives, try positive reinforcement. See what happens with it. You never know. There's been studies done where it creates such incredible bonds with the owners where the connection between the two becomes so tight that it's pretty much unbreakable. Because the dog can trust you. The dog knows you're not going to hit them. They know you're not going to yell at them. They know that you're not going to choke them. You're not going to do anything to hurt them. And that's so important that the dog understands that you are a safety net for them and they can come to you when there's a problem. Because if they feel that they can't come to you, then what ends up happening is the dog is going to end up lashing out on somebody else. And then you're going to have bigger problems on your hand. So, until then, thank you for listening. Keep them leashed.